Morning, Drive Time. Welcome back. As always, I'm your host, David Drum. And with me today is Dr. David Seemuth. He is the president and founder of the Wisconsin Center for Christian Studies, and he's also the co-founder of NT Wright Online with Dr. Wright. And David, thank you for joining us today and spending a little bit of time with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I love the idea about being on drive time because I spend a lot of time in my car. So thinking about being on drive time, it feels like I should be in the car right now and just doing this while I'm driving, but that wouldn't be a good idea.
Oddly enough, we've had two guests over our couple of years of doing this. Both were passengers, but we did have a couple of guys that did do this from a vehicle. So your thought is not misplaced. But so you and I had started the dialogue off camera, so to speak, and about, this is the age of information, and everybody is just driven to learn more and more. And it's this sense where we have to eliminate unknowns. Yet in our conversation, you said that really as your knowledge increases, the things you don't know should increase as well. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yes. One of the opportunities that I have as a pastor, former pastor, and a professor is to teach classes. And I know a lot of people, when they join my classes, they think, oh, I'm going to go and hear the professor and he's going to teach me all these things. And I throw a little curveball at them, and I usually have a whiteboard in my classroom, and I go up on the whiteboard and I will draw a box up in the upper right-hand corner, a rectangle, and I call it the I don't know box. And I tell people in the class, I say, this is your I don't know box, and my goal is that you would not only fill this box with questions as I'm teaching, but also that the box would, over the course of a semester, that the box would increase in size because you have more questions than you had at the beginning. And they look at me like, wait a minute, we're paying a lot of money to have you teach us, and you're saying you're going to increase the number of questions. Now, I do my teaching, and I hope they learn. I want to do my best at teaching them as best that I can, but I know that I'm throwing a lot of information at them, and hopefully I am giving them information about which they would say, I don't really know either what that means or what that might mean that I should do, what I should do with that information. But the whole idea is to approach an encounter, a learning encounter, with the idea that I will probably be led to asking more and more questions about what I've either heard or read. And I, like most of the people that are listening and watching right now, every morning will get online and I will consume an enormous amount of information. Mm-hmm. And I am afraid that I don't ask enough questions personally, because I assume that the information that I'm receiving is either accurate or unbiased, and that is usually not the case.
Okay, so and I would agree with you that we should definitely filter some of the media intake with, is this unbiased, or is this just a one-sided point of view? But in terms of, say, our faith, yes, a lot of guys that I interact with, when we really start drilling down into issues and questions that they have, I can't count the number of times that someone will say, well, yeah, I've struggled with that question, but I didn't want to ask because I didn't want to look like I had these doubts or look like I didn't know something that maybe everybody else thought was basic. What do you think, realistically, where does that land in terms of your I don't know box?
Well, I was just driving home, speaking of drive time, just driving home for this, and I had a voicemail from a friend of mine saying, I have these questions about how we can show that the resurrection, the bodily resurrection of Jesus actually happened, and I need an analogy to help people to understand that. And so it was one of these questions about how can I make this make more sense for people, and that instantly put into my mind, all right, how can I help him to ask the right kinds of questions to make it more understandable to the average person and more relatable? And I think one thing that comes to mind is that interaction that Jesus had with one of the people he encountered, and the person said, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. And I shake my head and I'm thinking, well, okay, do you believe or do you not believe? And of course, the answer is a little of both. And I think, to be fair, we all are in that place at some times. And even at the very end of one of the Gospels, when Jesus does appear to his disciples after his resurrection, it says that they knew it was Jesus, but some doubted. So we should face the fact that when we come to issues regarding Christian faith, that doubt is a part of that walk of life. It doesn't mean that we don't believe in God or don't believe in Jesus or that he rose from the dead. What it means is that we still have questions to process, and we should, because we probably don't have it all figured out yet.
Right. So, and I agree with you. And I love that verse, the help my unbelief. I find a lot of comfort in knowing that, Jesus' response wasn't to chastise the man for doubting him. It was to actually provide the healing that he was there to get for his son, which is so awesome. So now we're talking about this I don't know box is a very countercultural idea. Yes. So how do we start that process? How do we start shifting our thinking to make that I don't know box a thing and make it okay in our own head?
Yeah, part of it, making it your own thing, is saying I am okay with questions and I don't have to always have the answer. Now, that is something that is not very much a part of our society. Our society wants you to have some answer. They may not even want you to have the correct answer. They want you to have often their answer, not even necessarily the correct answer. So we need to just settle into the idea that it's okay to ask questions and to probe a little bit deeper. And I wrote a blog once that it was called From Memes to Meaning. And what we encounter all the time online are memes. These short statements that supposedly actually say something. Usually they are packed full of assumptions rather than meaning that takes a little bit longer than what the Facebook or Instagram post says right in front of you. So we ask questions about that, and we're not shy about asking those questions. I remember one of my very, very favorite stories. Peter, at the end of the Gospel of John, is asked by the Lord, "Do you love me?" And as you know, he's asked 3 times, and Peter gets pretty ticked off about it. It's like, come on, I love you. And the point wasn't finding out factually, Peter, do you actually have affection towards me? The point actually was to get Peter to be in a mindset so that he could receive a message from Jesus about what his vocation would be. So, and being asked 3 times, do you love me? You can't even miss the issue of, because if you ask the question, why 3 times? Well, how many times did Peter deny Jesus?
3 times.
3 times. And so you could ask a question, why 3 times? Well, you realize what Jesus is doing is he is affirming Peter 3 times to actually reverse what Peter did in the denial. And then he gave Peter this charge to feed my sheep, feed my lambs, and to be the person you're supposed to be. I love it that Jesus starts with questions, and usually we all need questions to get us a little bit anxious in our seats, so that we can hear what we need to hear.
That's good. All right. Well, so then let me ask you this, because as we talked about before, this is drive time, and we love to land on that tangible item, the thing that we can all do this coming week. You know, it's Monday.
Yes.
We've got a whole week of work ahead of us to try and get just 1% better. So how do we take this idea of asking questions,
yes,
for the sake of learning, or maybe even for the sake of increasing that I don't know box? What's the step that we can take this week?
Well, I'd like to think about this in a couple of ways. One would be the interpersonal way. I play pickleball, and I would happen to be with a partner that I didn't know very well, and I'll call him Rick, and I didn't know him particularly well. We've played many pickleball games together as partners, and he just happened to be with me, and I said, Rick, how's your life? And he said, oh, well, things are great. No, I said, no. I mean, like, what is your life all about? And what are you excited about? Because I didn't know him well, and he didn't know me well, and we, just through a couple of questions, were able to go perhaps a little bit deeper than how are you doing? Great, just fine, that kind of stuff. And I learned more about his own life, a little bit about his relationships, to the extent that we had in about 3 minutes, and then we got to playing our game of pickleball. But that's relationally, just a couple of those kinds of questions that are out of the ordinary, not just how are you, but tell me what's exciting about your life. You know, so you're saying, what really excites you about today? You don't get asked that very, very often. So we can be thinking in terms not of the usual conversation that we might be entering into with other people, but asking a question that's a little bit off the wall, and that's okay. To shake people up a little bit. That's interpersonal style. I think when we are engaging in the sheer amount of information that's coming our way, I think we should ask a question. One of them for us is, how much of this information do I need to know? That's one question. And because one of the things I think we all have been weighed down with the war in Ukraine, I'm very troubled about it, but then I do have to ask myself, how many articles do I really need to read, and how many times a day? That's a really good question, because that, and then just as we're figuring out where we're spending our time, we could be asking, what is it I need to know? This is a good basic question. What do I need to know today, either about humanity, about the world, or about God, that I need to seek? And that could be, for instance, reading one verse or one from a psalm, or one verse from the Bible, or maybe one psalm itself, and just asking God, what are you saying to me today? And that's just a very simple question, but it opens us up to, I don't know exactly what God might be saying to me today, but I know He is speaking because I have His Word in front of me. Or it may be, God, how will you speak to me today? Because it may be through somebody else. And if you have your I don't know box with God, how will you speak to me today? Then you are focused in a little bit more on what people are saying, what's going on in your life, just the things that you might miss because it's casual, and yet it might be specifically for you because God sent somebody your way and you need to listen to him or her. That's the exciting thing about the questions that would say, particularly in relation to God and me, how will you speak to me today? What are you saying to me? And then how can I be conscious of asking the right questions of others to either open them up or to make a complex issue more understandable? Much of the media that we are subjected to is so simplistic that we must realize that we have to ask questions or we'll never get beyond the simple meme answers that you find online. And that is very troublesome for me because as a teacher, I'm always asking questions about what somebody is presenting to me. It's one of the things that I do in my classes. I have people present papers, and I reassure them I'll never shame them with a question, but I will be asking them to show that they actually have evidence for what they say. And it's amazing how many people have opinions but don't actually have evidence for what they say, or the evidence that they think is substantial and reliable is not. And so I ask a lot of questions, and of course I don't shame people in doing that, but they get challenged to go deeper in the same way I hope that our audience today would be thinking in terms of how can I go deeper than what the norm is for society. And you would be amazed what you can learn in asking other people simple questions about their lives, and asking about even the things we're interacting with in terms of information, even whether it's at work or at home. An extra question is usually better than an extra statement.
Well, that's interesting because it also shows interest in what the other person is offering versus just rebutting with your own thoughts and opinions. So I can see where that also, you talked about the relational component would play into that quite a bit. So, well, David, I just want to say thank you for spending time with us this morning. And guys, if you enjoyed this conversation, just don't miss next week because David's going to be back with us next week. We're going to continue our dialogue into kind of a different topic, but it is really all kind of tied together in a sense. So, gentlemen, have a great week, and we'll see you again right here on Drive Time.